Welcome. We're going to go ahead and get started. I have a little short introduction, and then the elections division staff are going to take it over. So welcome to our quarterly EEP meeting. A lot has happened since our last meeting in September. Our team prepared for and held one of the most controversial elections in history. But because of the coordinated efforts of our staff and our volunteers, it was the smoothest major election I've been involved with in 30 years. There was a tremendous amount of planning over the last 18 months. We planned and over-planned at every step of the election process. We planned for social unrest, for crowded polling places, for storms, for PSPS power shutoffs, for smoke, in addition to the regular election planning that we always do. Fortunately, we had good weather and no local fires, and it allowed for us to have some outside polling places and things like that. So we put out messages via the press, and we spoke before our board of supervisors and anybody else that we could get the message to, for people to vote by mail and to vote early. And our voters listened. We've never seen such a vote by mail response. The November 2020 election broke several records. It was the first time we exceeded 700,000 registered voters. That is a historic threshold for this county. It was also the highest number of voters that turned out to vote. We had 591,000 voters vote in the last election. This is nearly 100,000 more than any other election. We didn't break the turnout from 2008, which was 86%, but we got close. Over 84% of the people that were eligible to vote voted. We did have the highest vote by mail percentage, with 91.3% of voters voting by mail. So I wanted to turn it over to Sarah. She's going to talk about the details of how the election went. But before I turn it over to her, I want to recognize Scott Konopasek. He's worked with us for the last almost 8 years. His team made this successful election possible. And I don't know if you've heard yet, but Scott is retiring near the end of January, but his expertise will be sorely missed. He's done a lot for us over the last few years. So thank you, Scott, and I'm going to turn it over to Sarah.
Thank you, Debbie.
Great, thank you. So, first off, before I jump into a little bit to tell you a little bit more about all the kind of like planning and preparation that you're aware of that went into this election, I just want to introduce other election staff that we have on the call here, who will be speaking as we go throughout the kind of brief report back program tonight. So you've already seen Scott and Debbie here. We also have Sophie Lehman, who, like myself, is an elections manager here. Also joining us, we have Jessica DeTangel, who is our voter services supervisor. We have Rosa Mena, who is our candidate services supervisor, and for this last election is also overseeing our early voting program. We also have Jose Gonzalez, who is our election day operations, works with our poll worker teams and all of our election day activities. We have Aaron Mendez, who is our outreach coordinator, who works with all of the locations that we were at these sites, as well as working on different outreach and engagement strategies as well. It looks like we also have Karen Tedford on the line, who many of you met before, and also Val Hanfield, who's our assistant county clerk, joining us as well. Did I get everyone on our team? I think so. I'm trying to look at all the pictures on the screen here. If I forgot anybody, I apologize, and introduce yourself later. So with that, we have a couple of slides here that Sophie will be sharing and clicking through for us. We're going to touch on a couple of some of the numbers that Debbie touched on in her introduction. So first off, so the November 2020 election, this election, looked different than the March election. And first off, I just wanted to give you a couple of different kind of comparison stats. As Debbie highlighted, this was the first election that we had more than 700,000 registered voters. Yeah, as you can see from here, we had a really dramatic increase in voter registrations between the March and November election. That's usual for a presidential election cycle, But of course, this election saw even more interest than we've seen in past years. The thing that I wanted to point out on these pages too is not just what these big numbers are, but that we actually estimated about a year or so ago that we were going to be at about 700,000 registered voters. And we estimated that the turnout for the November election was going to be right around the 600,000 or so participation number, somewhere around that 85%. So by making those types of predictions and estimates early, we were able to make sure that we were really prepared for this high participation election. Of course, there was a lot of other curveballs that came at us in the 2020 election cycle, but that early investment of coming up with good numbers to prepare for the cycle, put us in a really great spot, despite the fact that we had a pandemic and everything else that happened in this election cycle. The other piece that we see on here is the share of the folks voting by mail. So up to a record high of 91% in November. As you can see, back in March, it was 74%. This is a trend that has been continuing that we've seen over the last several years. It was at 68% of the vote share in November 2018 was vote by mail. So this is a trend that we've been seeing coming for a long time. Of course, there were new factors this election cycle with everyone being mailed a ballot and the pandemic certainly increased the trajectory of those vote by mails increasing. But it's been trending that way for a number of years. Last piece here is I wanted to flag that. So I think one of the most impressive things that we were able to accomplish this November election was the amazing throughput of ballot cards that we counted. So this November election, we had a 5-card ballot, as you likely saw, and we jumped from processing about 1 million cards back in March to almost 3 million for the November election cycle. So 3 million pieces of paper, being, taken out of the envelopes and being scanned through the machines and getting tallied up so everyone can see the results. It's a lot of paper and a lot of votes, each of which we treat very carefully. So next up on our next slide here, just kind of another quick glance at, what was the same and what was different from March to November. So as we touched on in the November election, as you're well aware, every active registered voter was mailed a vote by mail ballot. We send out those stickers with everybody's ballot because we didn't want folks coming just in to get the sticker, and we know how our voters feel about making sure that they have that sticker to proudly wear. We did increase our number of 24/7 drop boxes. This is actually something that we were looking at in advance of even before the pandemic, and it looking like there was going to be an increase in vote by mail. We were looking to increase that kind of ease of access for the voters to be able to drop off their ballots. Which was good once again, in that we were able to get our order in early. There were a number, of counties who were going to be new to having Dropbox programs or expanding their Dropbox programs. And as you're likely well aware, shipping delays really, became a challenge the further we got into this year. And so by already having an established relationship there and getting our order in early, we were able to ensure that we had many more locations available to our voters this cycle. We bumped up our early voting sites. That was in preparation not only for looking at the pandemic, but also as Debbie touched on earlier, with fire seasons, kind of unknown of what kind of facility availability that we might have. Also looking to provide outdoor options for people to be able to vote in person for those that needed to. And of course, we maintained those neighborhood polling places so that folks were able to return to usually where they usually voted for in most elections. For those that needed that in-person voting opportunity, they were able to have that available to them on election day. And we already touched on the skyrocketing voter turnout there. So now I'm going to hand it over to Sophie to chat a little bit more about some of the kind of pandemic and other kind of 2020 sorts of things that we ended up doing for this November election cycle that were new and different this time around.
Thanks. And I think one thing we forgot at the beginning is if you do have questions, please use the chat function to chat those in. We're going to hold questions until the end. So we're going to give you kind of push out all the information and then hear what questions you have at the end. So feel free to chat as we go along, but we're going to wait till the end to address those questions. All right, so next slide here. So step one of making in-person voting as safe as possible was to acquire as much PPE as we needed. And so that ended up being pallets upon pallets of a variety of products, including, let's see, 8,000 bottles of hand sanitizer, 60,000 masks, 80,000 pairs of gloves, 5,000 face shields, 35,000 disinfecting wipes, and lots of other stuff that's not here. But this was definitely a new and exciting add to all of our packing lists, but something that we felt really fortunate we were able to acquire the product that we needed and get that out to keep our poll workers and our voters as safe as possible in the current conditions. So in addition to simply acquiring the supplies we needed for PPE, there was also needing to develop the signage, the protocols, all of the other pieces that go into making in-person voting as safe as possible. And so we spent a lot of time with county risk management, simulating polling places here at our office and doing other things to make sure that everything was fine-tuned and up to speed. And so the good news is voters and poll workers really adapted to kind of these new rules and regulations. Queuing up outside, staying apart, being masked, all of that was really, really successful. And so I was really pleased to see all that hard work pay off and really see a really smooth election day as a result. So as Sarah mentioned, we were really excited to see as many people vote by mail as we did, 91%. And part of that, to encourage that, we actually conducted a TV and digital ad campaign that ran throughout the month of October. And right now I'm going to hopefully play one of those for you. We will see if this is successful, so bear with me for a second.
Contra Costa County is ready to help you vote in this election, but this year is different. Don't take this the wrong way, but we're okay with not seeing you in person. Of course you can if you want to, but we're encouraging you to vote from home. Every registered voter in Contra Costa County will receive a ballot by mail. Fill it out, sign it, then mail it back, or drop it in one of our 37 secure drop boxes as soon as you can. Be safe, vote early, vote at home.
Hopefully you all saw that and actually heard that as well. So that was one of 6 ads we put together. That was one of 3 30-second ads, and we had 3 15-second clips as well. Those ran on TV and on digital. So if you didn't get a chance, you can go to our Facebook page or our Twitter account, and you can see all 6 varieties of those. Another fun fact about those actually is that all of those actors that you saw were our staff or our family and friends. So it was an interesting production for us to put together, but felt like it really actually addressed, really helped voters understand, the need to vote that ballot that we were mailing them. The other thing that we did, as Sarah mentioned, was that we tripled the number of outdoor drop boxes that we had this election. And we saw a really large increase in the number of ballots that were returned via Dropbox. Over half of our vote by mail ballots were actually returned to a Dropbox for this election, which was up from just 14% in March. And I think we talked about this a little bit at our September meeting as well. That was right after sort of the USPS stuff had come out and things like that, and voters had concerns. And so that definitely reflected in the sheer volume that we saw at drop boxes. But the good news is we had already had a program in place, and it was simply a matter of upping, routes and routines and really doing the same successful work we had done prior. One thing I will mention, I know that unauthorized drop boxes came up a little bit this election, and the good news is we had no issues or reports of unauthorized drop boxes in Contra Costa County, so that was not something that we dealt with here. All right, so this was the first time that the state provided ballot tracking via their vendor ballot tracks. So prior to this election, you could check the status of your ballot on our website, but we didn't have the capability to send you a text, an email, or a phone call telling you about that proactively. And just to be clear, that service is still available on our website. You can still check the status of your ballot anytime on our website, but this was something that the state offered in addition to what we already offered on our website. And so just to be clear, this was something that was run by the state, even though it was often branded as Contra Costa County. And overall, it was really successful, we think. You can see about 26% of our voters actually signed up for this service. We and a few other counties did receive some feedback about the messaging, and there was some confusion about the messaging and a couple other things. And we've shared that with the state. And so we're hoping they'll make some revisions in the future. But overall, this seemed to be a pretty popular choice and supplemented what we were already offering, but giving you a little more proactive information as opposed to you needing to visit our website. So because we were expecting this high volume of vote by mail ballots, we actually started signature checking, processing, and extracting ballots earlier than we ever have before. And because of COVID, we needed different space because our space would no longer fit while maintaining distance for this volume of ballots. So we actually rented a nearby gym. And you can see, I'm going to try and play another video here of our folks out and about. This was their stretch break. We don't need to play the whole song, but I think you get the picture of it. That was definitely a stretch it out break because they were sitting there for many hours a day doing the same repetitive work, which was just counting ballots, opening envelopes, boxing them, and moving on. And remember, we manually extract every single vote by mail ballot from the envelope. So we touched all 590,000 returns that came our way. So this group of people in this spot did all of that manual labor. And now I think I'm going to turn it over to, I believe, Jessica, who's going to talk a little bit about some of our vote by mail stats.
Okay, good evening, everybody. So it looks like Sarah and Sophie talked a lot about all my talking points, but I'll just briefly go over some of them again. So yes, we had over 700,000 registered voters. Every single one of those registered voters received a vote by mail ballot to whoever their residence address, their mailing address. We mailed a ballot to every single person, regardless of how they returned it. We received over 540,000 back, so high numbers. It was about a 50-50 split on returns through mail or at our drop boxes. But our drop boxes were fairly more popular this time, which they were more convenient, a lot more safer. You don't have to fight the crowds. So we see why people use them. And there was a lot of stuff going around about the post offices, even though they were very reliable this election. We also noticed that post offices, that vote by mail ballots came back much earlier this election versus any other election before. Most times they wait for the week before the election or election day when they like to visit our polls and drop them all off, and we don't get the larger amount back until election night. So a lot of people didn't wait, which was a great thing, especially for the processing end. So it was a benefit to us. And each one of these ballots that were returned went through various stages of a verification process. Every signature on each of these envelopes were scanned, visually previewed by a person, and a determination was made whether the signature matched what we had on the voter's file. If the signature matched the first stage, the ballot went through extraction and then counted. If it did not match at the first stage, then it went through a second level review, which a more experienced staff member would review the signatures, would make a decision from there. And if not, then we would reach out to the voters by sending them a letter, letting them know that their signature did not match and they had an opportunity to cure that signature on that envelope. Overall, the people that fell into this, the voters that fell into this category was a very low number. And we had, sorry, let me see these numbers here. 54% of these people, there's two different categories, 54%, over 50% of these people returned the letters that we sent to them, and of course some didn't. But overall, we got a lot of positive feedback this election from voters, especially with vote by mail experience. So that was a good thing this election. So overall, vote by mail was great, and we had good feedback from our voters of Contra Costa County. Okay, thank you.
All right, so next up here, we have Rosa. Just one moment while I get her unmuted. All right, should be able to now, Rosa.
Okay, hello everyone. Nice to see everybody here. And yes, I'll share the news regarding our regional early voting sites. As it was mentioned earlier today, we had a very big increase for the general election and compared to the primary election. So we went from having 3 regional early voting sites to having 17. And that's, so it's one that was, well, one of them is the extension to our office, which, you know, we start voting 29 days before the election, so that we start like a month before. And then our regional early voting sites are 4 days before the election. And those went from 3 to 17 for this general election, which helped everybody tremendously, us at work and the voters. Everybody was really happy because we distribute those 17 centers all throughout the county. So everybody had a place to go to that was closer to their house. If they just wanted to vote early or if they wanted just to return a ballot. So overall, the numbers that I have here for people who participated, it was a wonderful experience. We had to train over 100 staff members that got training for 2 days. But we had very wonderful outcomes from everybody. We trained leads. The way we worked with it is we trained our leads, which were staff that we hired, and then the leads trained their staff that they were going to be using at their voting sites. So it was very, very interesting. I think we all got very wonderful experience from that. And the numbers that we got, the people that we were able to serve by having this amount of early voting sites was about 12,896 total people that voted at the early voting sites. So the turnout was great and people were very appreciative they were there. We had lines as expected. You know, we were expecting those lines because we knew the interest was there for people to go to to vote in person. And I think that's all I really have to report regarding the early voting sites.
Great, thank you, Rosa. All right, so next up we have Jose's going to talk a little bit more about the poll worker and election day experience.
Good evening, everyone. So I know this slide doesn't have much of about poll workers, but there is a nice picture of one of our teams that served at one of our polling places. So first of all, I want to say that I'm very thankful and grateful for the commitment of our poll workers during this election season. They really sacrificed and risked a lot, you know, for being part of this election. You know, under the conditions that we were in the summer, I thought it was going to be nearly impossible to be able to staff all of our polling places, but I was proved wrong by our volunteers. Early on in June and July, we received a lot of confirmation to serve on election day from our existing poll workers, enough to staff all of our polling places, which was great news for us and eased a lot of the stress that I was getting to, you know, think that I wasn't going to be able to staff all of those polling places. So on election day, as this slide shows, we had 893 poll workers serve at 153 polling places throughout the county. 187 of those were high school students who volunteered. 140 were bilingual poll workers that were spread out through all of our polling places. And not only that, we also had a bunch of interest in new applicants. We had nearly 3,000 new applications come in, and it made it easy to be able to fill any last minute vacancies that came up. The only bad part was that due to our reduced staffing formula and us being able to abide to local and county ordinances on room capacity, social distancing protocols, we weren't able to conduct too much in-person training, and we're not able to staff many of our new applicants. But we look forward to working with those individuals in the future. And right now we're currently planning on how we're going to orient them and get them on board for future elections. A little bit about poll workers in this election. They were very flexible with training this time around. This time around, we had them attend 2 different types of training. For the first time, they attended a virtual training on Zoom, just like we're doing right now, which is very cool to see everyone that way. And also a brief 30-minute poll pad training that was done in person on our new electronic poll book, which you're seeing there. You know, poll workers managed to learn this new technology on the fly and did a really great job. Poll workers raved about how easy it was to operate and the improved time spent on processing the voter. But I think the biggest news of I would say improvement that the poll pad brought was the reduced number of provisionals. So I'm not sure if I want to hand it off now to whoever is going to talk about provisionals, but
it's me, but feel free to jump in first with your big takeaways.
So the reduced number, this election, we only had 6,383 provisionals total, which is, you know, a huge decrease from the last election. So sure, Sarah will talk a little bit more on that.
Sure, I'll expand on that. So yeah, I mean, the poll pads, the electronic poll books were great for a lot of reasons. I think, you know, certainly on our processing end, and I'm sure it made voters happy too, where there were opportunities for these voters to be able to, you know, cast their ballot in person and not provisionally on election day. They really enjoyed that. So to Jose's point, we had to really dramatically reduce the number of provisionals for this November election. 79% decrease, as you can see here, in provisional voting from March. Of course, there were a lot less in-person voters in November, this November, compared to other election years. But also the big change there that the electronic poll books allowed us to, in most cases, folks were voting provisionally because they had been issued a vote by mail ballot, but they had not returned that ballot, or we didn't know if they had returned that ballot. With the paper roster, you know, it was unknown what the status of that vote by mail was. So with the electronic poll book, we were able to look up to see if that person had cast a ballot yet or not. And importantly, we were able to indicate immediately on that voter's record if they were casting a ballot in person on that day. So by being able to look up the status and be able to apply a voting status to a voter, we were able to, as you see here, you know, really dramatically shrink the number of provisionals that were issued in person at these locations. So as you can see here, the vast majority of these provisionals we were able to count. The couple of reasons that we were unable to count provisionals was because the voter didn't provide us either any information or like not enough information for us to be able to, in most cases, be able to register them and vote. Just so you know, for all of these voters, if there was any contact information on there and they were missing kind of other, you know, critical information, we did reach out to each and every one of those voters with whatever information they provided to try to make their registration good. Or it turned out that they weren't a resident here in Contra Costa County. So the other thing that was really different about provisionals this time, and I think this is touched on in the next slide, is that the majority of folks now are not people who had a vote by mail ballot and we were issued a ballot and we didn't know if they returned it, but are in fact people that needed to register to be able to vote. So more than 50%, 3,512 of those, 6,000 or so provisional ballots that we received back were people who were new registrants, at least for Contra Costa County. And so by voting provisionally, they were able to fill out that registration form, place their ballot inside. We were able to get those back to our office, be able to register them and be able to count those ballots. And I think that's really what we'd love to see provisional voting be used for when it's needed, is to get those new folks in the system here. All right, so next up, we are going to wrap up. We're talking a little bit about the kind of the Canvas and certification process, and then we will be able to dive into some questions here shortly. So I'll hand it over to Sophie to kick it off. I'll add a couple of points, and then we'll be on our way.
Yeah. So after Election Day, I think a lot of people learned sort of the words Canvas and certification this time. So we spend about a month after Election Day still kind of doing a lot of work. And so that is when we continue to count ballots. We spend time reviewing and processing any provisional ballots. We also conduct reviews and audits to ensure that there aren't any major issues. And obviously during this month-long period, we're waiting for voters to return any of those signature letters that Jessica mentioned so that we can then count those ballots as well. Something else that we're also working on during this period is remaking any ballots that were damaged and couldn't be read by the scanner. Since all ballots need to go through the scanner in order to be counted. If there are damaged cards, we need to remake those. And this election, we did have over 29,000 cards that needed to be remade. Sometimes it's because they're ripped. Sometimes it's because there's large food or other stains or wrinkles, like anything though that would stop it going through a scanner. We need to remake that ballot. And so we had about over 29,000 that needed to be remade. But so overall, this was actually a pretty smooth Canvas period for us. There wasn't a ton of kind of unexpected development during that period. It was really just getting through the counting, getting through the processing, looking at those provisionals, and then making sure every eligible ballot was there to be counted.
Great. So then I was going to add a little bit more about the 1% audit. So one thing I wanted to flag is that after every election, this isn't new for this election, but there's certainly some more attention on it this election cycle compared to others, is we do an audit of the election results and of the ballots. So the day after the election, and this is what you see with the dice rolling here, and Evan, one of our team members, with the giant pieces of paper on the wall here. The day after the election, we do a random drawing and select a number of vote by mail and polling place batches of ballots. We hand count we hand count the contest on those ballots and compare those to what the machine totals read. So this is all part of, before the election, we have the logic and accuracy testing. We do the preliminary testing. We are, throughout the election, we have various kind of auditing checkpoints. And then after the election, we're doing this next check, really to ensure that the machines are totaling the ballots, just as we expect, to make sure that we're having that confidence in the accuracy there. This election, we hand counted more than 30,000 cards. So the teams that you see sitting at the tables in the bottom left here are all teams that are folks working in teams of 2 to be able to tally what those results are, to again compare against those machine totals. And we just wanted to flag this one is, this is an example of, and Sophie touched on a few more of them, one of the many steps that we complete during the Canvas. A lot of folks that, not so much probably folks on this call, but many people ask, why it takes California so long to certify the election. And I think we don't look at it as taking too long, but we look at it as taking the right amount of time to ensure that we are able to count, every eligible vote that's cast, and be able to ensure that the results that we are certifying are accurate results here in the county. So with that, then many of you may know that we did certify this election. So this November 2020 election was certified on Monday, November 30th to the state and to the county. And those election results were subsequently adopted by the state, counties, and cities beyond that. So that was a wrap on the November 2020 election. So with that, now we want to be able to take an opportunity to dive into some of the questions that you have. So I do want to encourage folks to go ahead and type their questions into the chat, and we will look to answer them. And if we could actually also have folks, I forgot to ask this at the top of the meeting, in the chat, if you can type in your name and your organization, if you're affiliated with one, helps us to be able to do the attendance log there. So if you can type that in as well, and then please go ahead and submit your questions.
So we do have a couple of questions in chat.
Very good.
So Sarah, you're our rep on the legislative committee. This question is the state considering vote by mail ballots for everyone again?
Yes. So there's already legislation that will look to be that's going to be introduced in the new year. You know what will come of that? I don't think we know just yet. But yes, I anticipate that the state will be looking towards that in the new year. And we like sending folks ballots. So voting by mail seemed, you know, as the numbers show, was very popular in our county. So hopefully the state takes a favorable view upon that.
So there's also a question about long lines. And normally when we talk about long lines, we think about election day. But we also had lines occasionally at our early vote site. So Jose and Rosa, do you want to, from your perspective, take a shot at that question?
So I can speak to election day. So there was report of lines. I wouldn't say that there were super long lines. And I think the longest line that we had was in the evening time, and it was around 10-minute wait. It wasn't that, you know, there was, you know, couldn't handle the number of voters. It was just we were queuing voters in as a voting booth became open, but it was going by pretty quick, kind of like what we're all used to now when entering a grocery store. There's a line, but it goes by pretty quick. So I would say around 10 minutes was the longest wait.
I will speak for the early voting sites. So at the early voting sites, we did have lines, especially the first day. And mainly it was at some of the centers that were the bigger centers. And that was due not so much because of the time it took for them to be processed. It was the capacity of the room. So we could only have 6 of the voting devices in each center. So that's what kind of made a line, but it was nothing where people were complaining, or I would say everybody was helped within maybe the most 30 minutes or so. But the lines kept moving. We had people that were walking the line, and some people wanted to drop off their ballot. So we had those people drop their ballot instead of standing in line. So we did see lines, but like I said, they were moving pretty quickly.
I would also actually add that they were lines of enthusiasm, not really lines that were problematic or indicated that there was an issue with the process. Before early voting even started on Friday, we had voters lined up at least an hour, if not more, ahead of time. That was actually the woman that you saw on the early voting slide. She was the first person in line at, I believe it was Walnut Creek. So really, we didn't see that many lines, and the ones we did see were really because people got there, they got there early, and then it just took time to work through the people who were already there.
Yeah, most places around the country would not consider those lines at all. So Rosa, coming back or staying with early voting, did any voters have any special problems with language access, disabilities, changes in signature, confusion at early vote sites?
Okay, so first of all, I would say about 80% of our early voting sites had people that spoke a different language. We try to target especially, we did a study and we kind of saw where we had more people register that were Spanish speakers, and we had all different kinds of languages, and we try to staff those places with a person that spoke the language. So that was the first thing we did. And
so
also,
Rosa, excuse me, let me just interrupt for a second. So what you meant when you said 80%, you meant 80% of our workers spoke another language, not 80% of the voters who showed up needed language assistance.
No. What I mean was it was the workers. We had them staffed by the language that we saw was required for that area. And the other great thing about our voting machines is that anybody can use those machines. It had all the languages on there, so if people did not feel comfortable voting in English, they can pick any of the languages, and they were able to vote that way. And then as far as anybody else, like disability, I see that you guys also, somebody asked about disabled people and stuff like that. Those machines are literally made for any type of disability. So they have Braille, they have the sip and puff for people if they want to bring in their equipment. We have headphones, we have everything. So no, we had no issues as far as languages or disability or anybody that requires certain, that had a disability. There were no reports from the early voting sites.
Thanks, Rosa. AOSA, someone's noted that it's a state law to post all voters' names. Why? It scares some people away.
I'm sorry, what was the question?
So someone noted that we're required to post lists, indexes of voters, and sometimes having their name out there might scare people. Can you talk about how we did that, how we handled that situation this time?
Sure. So this time around, like we mentioned before, we had a new electronic poll book, which forced us to do things a little bit different. So first of all, the rosters were not printed on paper; they were on the poll pad on the iPad. Second was that the voter index that a lot of poll watchers or other groups come in to mark off or see who has come in to vote, those were not printed. The way we handled that this time around was that we were running reports by the hour, and we're posting them on our website. There was a QR code at the polling place where someone could scan that QR code and go directly to the webpage where they can view both a PDF and also exportable file where they can view anyone who has voted in that time frame, and also a cumulative list of everyone who had voted at every polling place in the county.
Oh, you're muted, Scott. Looks like you're chatting there.
I thought I had unmuted myself there temporarily. So Carol asked kind of a clarification question to the question Rosa just answered. Did people want to vote in person? Is that why they showed up at early voting sites? And I'll take that question. I visited half of the early voting sites while voting was going on. Sarah visited the other half, and we had a chance to visit with voters and talk to the teams that were working out there. And some people, there was a percentage of people who were just adamant that they wanted to vote in person, that was the most important thing to them. They didn't really need any particular assistance. They just felt for their own reasons that they wanted to vote in person. That lady in the chair that Jose pointed out was in line, or maybe a Sophie. She was there an hour early, and I talked to her, and she was adamant she's going to vote in person, and she's going to be the first person to vote early voting in Contra Costa County. So some people just didn't want to vote by mail, which is fine, which is why we had the in-person voting opportunities that we had. Okay, so I see another question here. Oh, Renee's doing math here. I thought you were a humanities major, not a mathematician, Renee. So she wants to know, I guess this is referring back to a slide.
Yeah, I can talk about it.
Okay, take it away, Sarah.
So so the question was about why don't numbers 1 and 2 add up to the total number of provisionals not counted? So those were not all the reasons, but they were the vast majority of the reasons that provisionals weren't counted.
The top 2 reasons.
Yes, top 2, numbers 1 and 2. Number 3 was actually that the person had already cast a ballot. Usually this happened because somebody would vote a vote by mail ballot, but they weren't like totally sure if, their vote by mail got it in time or did they get it? They couldn't check. So they decided, yeah, I'm just going to go and I'm going to go vote in person. As it turned out, we looked them up on the poll pad. We could see they voted by mail and they're like, well, just in case. And they went ahead and voted that provisional ballot. But good news, we didn't count it because they'd already counted their other ballot. So that was the other bigger category. And then we have some really tiny exceptions of we had a subcategory of someone didn't sign it and they didn't sign anything for us to be able to have their kind of declaration that's on the form, but that's a very small number of folks. So 1 and 2 are the main categories, but that explains the math of it there.
And actually on the topic of provisionals, I thought what was really interesting was the fact that the number 1 and 2 reasons for not counting in both March and November were the same. And they were actually really close in terms of total number. Obviously the percentage was different just because we had so many fewer this election, but both times it's still like, yep, there's a couple hundred people who don't reside in the county and who voted in the county and we can't count those. And yep, there's a couple hundred people who just didn't complete enough paperwork for us to get it done. And that seems like that's probably a pretty standard amount of, people just not quite doing all the stuff that we need in order to count those ballots.
Okay, well, there's no more questions. Come on. This group is well known for asking questions. Okay, Susan just sent one. Voter registration is the biggest challenge during pandemics and anytime. Can we consider more options when voter registration can be automatically offered when you register at a community college, promote monthly at libraries online, or paper forms automatically when you move, automatically at senior residences, and brainstorming. So Sarah and Jessica.
Yeah. So I'll say a couple things and then Jessica can chime in.
And then Aaron might want to jump in as well.
Yeah. So prompt everyone to unmute themselves here. So I think on registration, so one, I think a good thing that we saw, so we saw our registrations, I don't have the number sitting in front of me right now, go up by 40,000 between the March and November election. So a lot of folks fortunately were able to register, but even in this kind of even in this period here between March and November during the peak times of the pandemic. I think for those categories of items that you mentioned there, those are some of the areas that the state historically has looked at, some different types of legislation or different ways to kind of prompt community colleges in particular has been one that I've heard talked about in legislative sessions for a couple of years, and maybe that'll have some more likelihood of being advanced going into this new session. And while we're still seeing, some folks register on paper, the vast majority of folks are really taking advantage of online registration, whether that be transactions at the DMV or going on to register online independently. The numbers have just completely flipped from how we used to get registered. So we used to get boxes, or apparently before I was here too, a truckload of registrations, right? On the registration deadline. I don't even know, Jessica might be able to tell us how many paper registrations we had on the registration deadline this time, but I would guess that it is less than one box versus we, I'm sure had, 5, 10,000 or something like that online registrations at a similar time. Jessica, do you have anything you want to add to that?
Sure. So for paper registrations, nearing the registration deadline, there was a couple hundred versus the thousands we used to have backlogged to process. But for the voter registration, our online application is available 7 days a week, 24 hours a day. So it's always available to people that want to update their registration. And also we do receive, automatic registration through DMV. And we do receive address changes through the post office. So there is other outlets that we do use to update voters' information. But we really wouldn't know if someone moves unless they provide that information to one of those agencies, or if they contact us and we let them know their options on to update that information. So there's many different ways to promote voter registration. We do try our best. I know the pandemic changes things a little bit. There's not so much Reg Drive this last year, but there is other ways for people to register.
So Erin, for years you've been doing outreach. What's your perspective?
So I think that definitely the good news is that both the pandemic and the current events that were happening, it drew attention from people. You know, they were paying attention to, am I registered? Do I need to register? Did I move? So that was, you know, the silver lining in all of this. But I know that there were challenges with some of the community colleges, for example, you know, or schools in general, you know, they were not in session, but I think more and more the information was available and will continue to be available to students, you know, to be able to have either an online voter registration form access or the paper forms. With making it automatic is a little bit challenging because not every student, for example, at a community college may be eligible to register to vote, and it becomes kind of like a sensitive, you know, issue. So it is nice to make it available, but it, you know, with just some caution, I suppose, you know. I think that also the issue that it was brought up about the, you know, the when people they live in assisted living and things like that, we've talked about this before, is that when you make that their home address, or if they make a change, it may not be really what the family would want, you know, because somebody's taking care of their mail and things like that for them. So it becomes a little bit of a challenge, but I did get a number of calls from assisted living facilities, you know, where they wanted to help out, you know, and make sure that their person that they were representing, you know, had the right information, that they knew that their ballot was in the mail. They learned how to check, you know, online, because anybody can check online to see the status of a voter, you know, if they're registered. I know that there was also some opportunities, you know, with Debbie and Karen and Val, you know, out in the community, you know, visiting some of the sites, you know, to pick up their ballots. So all in all, I think the silver lining, like I said, is that because there was just so much attention to the vote by mail here in California, you know, the opportunity and the national news, you know, of U.S. Postal Service, it really helped make people pay attention. So we will continue to do that, you know, to try to network with the facilities and the schools, you know, and make this as easy as possible. But as you can see, the numbers were going up. So to me, the issue is always not so much about registration, although it could be challenging, but it's really participation. We want to keep those numbers, right? We want to keep that 80%, you know, not just in this big setup, you know, so more on that. And I look forward to working with you guys to continue to make things easy for everyone.
So Karen, I know you worked with some groups at the real grassroots level. What observations do you have in response to the question?
All right.
Hey, Karen, why don't you type your answer into the chat? We're getting some feedback and we really can't hear you. So there's another question. Sophie, I'll shoot this one to you. Can you go over the process for dealing with damaged ballot cards? And do you redo what was on the original card? And what if you don't know what the voter, if you can't read it?
Sure. So the reason we'll redo is either as soon as we pull it out of the envelope, it's just like mangled and we know that it won't go through the scanner. We set that aside for being remade. Or when it goes through the scanner, sometimes the scanner will pause because it jams or because it kicks it out. And we'll either try to rescan it. And if it still doesn't rescan, then we'll set that one aside for being remade as well. And once we pulled those cards to be remade, we remake them identically. So if someone votes for a contest and they vote for candidate A, when we remake it, we vote for candidate A. If they skip a contest, we skip that contest. If they accidentally vote for too many candidates, we do the same thing. So we remake it exactly as it's made. If we are unable to read it, so let's say it like ripped right through someone's mark and you can't tell what it is, we leave that as is, because if we had scanned that original card, we wouldn't have counted whatever that unmarkable part was. So we just make it identically to what the voter did, and we count it as is.
So how can people be confident that we actually correctly translated their marks?
So we have multiple people working, and they're doing it at the same time. And then they're reading, well, this time it's a little different because they're a little spaced out. But you have someone who's reading it and then you read back. And then also we keep the original. So at any time, I could go back, find the remade card, find the card it corresponds to, and do any kind of check to verify that it was correctly remade. So 2 people are working on it at all times. There's multiple checks during that process. And we keep complete records so that at any time I can find the original and the duplicate and then confirm that those were done correctly.
Great, thanks, Sophie. So Jessica, we don't have signature recognition software. We do it with our human eyeballs. But the question is, how do we account for people with Parkinson's and other chronic conditions that affect handwriting?
So the best thing that I can say is that we always let voters know they need to update their signature to the most current style of their signature. We do understand health conditions arise, but we do try to promote keeping an updated signature on file so that ballot that they return matches what we have on file for them. And then if it does not, we do reach out to the voters to try to clarify any questionable signatures that we receive.
Great, and thank you, Jessica. So there's another question, and this is actually the last one unless somebody chimes in a few more. Were there any disinformation campaigns around voting that we are aware of? And I'll take a first shot at that, and then anyone else on the team can jump in. So generally, no, nothing specific to Contra Costa County. When the unauthorized, unofficial drop boxes were put into operation, a lot of people were concerned, but we saw absolutely no evidence or got any reports that that happened here in Contra Costa County. It was something that did confuse voters. And I'm not really aware of anything else specifically that might fall into disinformation, but anyone else want to jump in? Debbie, did you hear anything?
No, just secondhand, the things that you hear on the news. You know, all I've heard is how well run things were, and I agree.
I think I'll just say that a lot of people, because of the news, you know, they were talking about, oh, you're going all vote by mail at the beginning, you know, all vote by mail, so no polling places. And they were pleased when we were telling them, no, we have vote by mail, we have early voting, we have polling places. So we had everything, you know, the same and more so than they were expecting, you know, so the more boxes, more drop-off stations and things like that. So I think that was a good turnaround. You know, I took many calls where the voters were upset, you know, at first, no polling places, no, that's not what it is. So in terms of misinformation or, you know, disinformation, that would have been one that was handled and we covered it pretty well.
Yeah, I was just going to add that, you know, I think we had a number of voters this time that just wanted to double check their vote counted. We had more phone calls, and the phone calls started a lot earlier, and they were staying in like record numbers. So usually election day would have the most phone calls. Not so November 2020. As it turned out, the week before the election was probably our highest volume day, and we were hitting somewhere around 1,000 phone calls a day in about the month or so leading up to the kind of big election day. But it goes to show you that obviously election is not just one day, right? We mail out ballots and people were returning those ballots sooner than ever, and they wanted to just double check that we got them back. And I think, with a lot of the national concern around the election, folks just wanted to have that kind of reassurance that, what was happening here in Contra Costa was what they expected. So we talked to a lot of happy voters, but also a lot of voters who just wanted to do those double checks.
So I see Velma here, and I've seen Velma a lot at a lot of these presentations over the last few months. You mind if I put you on a spot and ask you a question, Velma? So I know that you've been following along on all of our plans over the summer and in the fall as we were getting ready. And you must have had some expectations on how things would go. Tell us how you think we did and give us some observations.
Actually, I think you all have a very thankless job. And I just say kudos to all of you. All of my post meetings and things after the elections, I really, really encourage everyone to just give the county clerk's office and the elections office just a call to say thank you. Because in light of everything that went on nationwide, we can truly say without a shadow of a doubt that didn't happen here in Contra Costa County. And that just goes to all of you that worked in the scenes, behind the scenes. And I was very impressed. I mean, super impressed. Going to the early voting sites and even assisting with trying to pinpoint early voting locations. And, I know that's not an easy task. And to make sure, because in light of COVID, with the social distancing and trying to be compliant with all the health regulations, I really just have to say, I applaud you all for a job well done, because this was no easy feat. And I mean, seriously, I love just being in there and just being able to, I came right out of the census, working with the census, right into election season. And so I felt stir crazy, but it's just so important to be so community involved and engaged, and just to be able to know that you all are people too, and to hear the amount of bashing and just the verbal beat ups. It's like you have no clue what they're going through and what you all are doing. The long hours. I was calling Erin at 10 and 11, and y'all still at the office. And I was like, okay, do I need to come and help? Do I need to do something?
Home office.
So it's just crazy to just see and just to know the amount of work that you all did. And so I can't thank you enough. And I just think the community really just truly needs to understand and, and support the work that your office does. And, I look forward to assisting in any way capacity that I can going forward. You got me.
Great. Well, thank you, Velma. You don't know, and I'm going to speak for the whole staff. You don't know how much it means to us to have some recognition for the long hours and the hard work and the commitment. So Colleen, I'm going to pick on you for a second. You've been coming to all these meetings since the beginning of time. I don't think you've ever asked the question, but you have a unique perspective working for Supervisor Mitchoff. What questions do you have, or what feedback or observations would you offer?
I don't really have any questions. I usually come to the meeting so that when people call our office, I can be able to answer their questions too, if I can. And then of course you hear from me regularly throughout the election. I know we had a lot of people reaching out this time. It seemed like just very concerned about the general process. Is my ballot secure? And I think the elections department did a great job of really trying to reassure the public as much as they could. But I think these meetings I think are great because I actually really appreciate hearing the feedback from all the community organizations and from the different parties, and kind of how it helps our office as well to be able to kind of see if there needs to be additional messaging. And so that's just kind of a 2 cents overview of kind of why I appreciate these meetings, and it actually helps me to do my job too.
Willie, are you still with us here?
He does not appear to be here.
Okay, so Willie has been another faithful person who's attended the meeting. I wanted to make sure that I gave everyone a chance and an invitation to speak up and contribute. So Margaret or Noe, either one of you have anything that you'd like to add to our conversation tonight? So I think Sophie's inviting you to unmute yourselves.
I think I would just like to thank you for all your work on behalf of all the city clerks in the county. We really appreciate all the interactions that we have with your department. And I know that the 19 cities and probably a lot of the districts are throwing a lot of questions your way while you're busy with all of your other duties. And we just really appreciate all that you do.
Well, thank you, Margaret. It's a pleasure working with city clerks. We try to make your job easier, and we hope we make your job easier. Rosa, you want to chime in?
Really, I want to thank everybody for your support. You know, it really builds our character also. When we see that you guys representing the voters are, you know, giving us kudos and recognizing what we do, because literally we do all this with a lot of respect for the voters and for you guys that sometimes represent those voters. And I would say it's a love we have for elections, just like you guys have a love for this. We're all in this together, and it's a team effort.
Ain't no way. You're up, buddy.
Hey everybody, I'm Noe, N-O-E, like Noe Valley. I'm with the Rise Youth Center. Sorry y'all, I'm on my other laptop presenting for my last semester in my class, so I was listening attentively. I just had one question. It's like I have in many groups and many circles, is where's the youth? I don't see anybody close to my range. So all I would just want to know is for future times, what are efforts to, and if there isn't, and I would love to join that conversation. And if there's future plans, I would love to be a part of that planning process, us at Rise. Hey, this is me, and I look forward to seeing each and every one of y'all each and every time. Take care, and I hope y'all enjoy. And thank you for this panel. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Noe. I'm not sure if Sophie, Sarah, Jose, and others on the team would take any offense at not being considered young, because I know in their minds, Jessica and everyone else thinks they're young. So some of the rest of us, we know we're not anymore. But so we have Jamila also. If Jamila's on and would like to contribute something, that would be great. And then I think we'll almost have had something from everyone.
Hi, everyone. Yes, I'm Jamila, also with the Rise, and I work with Noe. Definitely, I think echoing the appreciations that have already been shared. I can't even imagine what it took to kind of transform all the different processes and protocols to making this a successful election season. And I think just echoing what Noe said also is that with any work, just wanting to be being able to provide space for young people to engage. And so if there's any efforts around like how can we increase voter registration or doing projects at the high school level or anything like that around outreach for young people, that we definitely would want to be in those conversations. And I think also just appreciating the work around the funding opportunity that came up leading up to the election was also really helpful to be able to expand some of the activities we were already planning to do, or think of new activities to do to reach out to voters and provide education to voters. And I think one thing, just thinking about, obviously that was definitely a very, very fast paced, quick turnaround, but going into the next election cycle, really thinking about how this could be a space or creating a different space for the groups who are all doing voter or civic engagement work around the county to get together to like learn from one another, share and promote each other's events or collaborate together. So also looking forward to those opportunities for future cycles.
Great, thanks, Jamila. We'll make sure that you're included. Velma, coming back to you.
I just wanted to add to Noe's point that my daughter, she just got here. She's from San Diego State, but she is home now for the holidays, and she has definitely been on these meetings when she was able to. So she's definitely very community involved and engaged, and was a part of some of the process with engaging youth. She will be celebrating her birthday in 2 days. So, so yes,
right.
she is in that age range of 18 to 25 range. So she definitely, and she actually hosted a few panels to talk about youth engagement and why it's important for them to understand, not only just to actually vote, but understand what they're actually voting for. And so she did a few of those panels. So we got our youth. We do have to corral more, and we have to properly inform them and engage them so that way that we are getting them to vote out there, and also encouraging even the early, the 16-year-olds, getting them pre-registered, because that was a nice thing for her and her brother to get that birthday card with their voter registration at 16. And when they would turn 18, they got their, you are officially registered to vote. So that was good. So I think that's one of the things that I know she wants to continue to champion on, is the early voting registration for 16-year-olds.
Great, great, thanks. So to you young people, I want you to know, and I'm speaking for myself, that you guys are the reason that I do this, that I've done this, that I'm committed to this. You guys are the future. You guys are my kids' age. I do this for my kids. I have grandkids. I do this for my grandkids. We do this for you, and we want you to be a part of it, and we want you to be involved, and we hope you feel welcome here with us. And with that, ladies, Sophie, Sarah, I'm going to toss it back to you.
Honestly, that was a really happy note to end on, I think. Thank you all for all of your kind words. That was really nice to hear, especially after a long period of time. But thank you, and we really appreciate your partnership, and looking forward to an even better 2021 and beyond.
Very good. Well, thank you, everybody. It was wonderful seeing everyone. I hope everyone has wonderful holidays coming up. Take care.
Happy holidays, everyone.
Bye-bye.